Okay, this is a quick video to discuss the different modes of documentary filmmaking. So there are 6 different modes of documentary filmmaking, but we will be looking specifically at the first 3. So expository mode, observational mode, participatory mode, and then the other 3 that we will not be looking at today are poetic, reflexive, and performative modes. So the expository mode, the main purpose of this mode is to present an argument. This is the model that is most often associated with documentary in general. The structure is grounded in a series of claims backed up by evidence. The claims are presented through verbal commentary, voiceover from an invisible narrator, while images provide the evidence. So as mentioned previously, we've looked at how documentaries are similar to essays in that they make claims and present arguments, present evidence to back up those claims. In expository mode, though, this is looking specifically at how a documentary can have purely just narration and no input other than the narration from the filmmaker themselves. So if you look at examples like March of the Penguins or other Animal Planet type documentaries or shows, quite often you'll see the mode that is presented primarily in these forms of documentaries is expository, where there will just be continuous footage of animals while a narrator voices over and discusses what's happening in that at that moment. The second mode we're looking at is observational mode. This mode uses the observations of an unobtrusive camera to create direct engagement with the everyday life of subjects. It deliberately avoids using interviews, voiceover, narration, and soundtrack and attempts to show rather than tell. So examples of this could be shows like reality TV shows and The Block and things like that, where the Kardashians, that sort of thing, where although they're not typically documentaries, just for the purpose of understanding this mode of filmmaking, they make sense. So this is where you see just people living their everyday lives, and the camera person is in there filming that those people living their lives without actually impeding on the scene, without asking questions or doing anything other than just being there and filming and observing. And the third mode that we're looking at today is the participatory mode. So this mode emphasizes the interaction between the filmmaker and the subject. These films usually take the form of a series of interviews or other forms of even more direct involvement, from conversations to provocations. Archival footage to examine historical issues is also included. So participatory mode, as it says, it focuses on the fact that there is a filmmaker, and that filmmaker will quite often appear in the film. So while the subject might be, for instance, Tiger King, while the subject might be about Joe Exotic, this guy who owns tigers, and all this crazy story that happens surrounding him, there is still a filmmaker who is interviewing Joe at times and sitting down and is actually featured in that film. So they're not a hidden, invisible narrator. They are someone that actually appears and is part of the story. So there is, as mentioned, expository, where purely narration and it is the only form of input from the filmmaker, no input from the filmmaker in the observational mode, and participation, full input from the filmmaker in participatory mode. Other modes of documentary filmmaking, poetic, reflexive, and informative, tend to be, sorry, that was it's meant to be performative, not informative, tend to be less conventional modes and have therefore been excluded from this presentation, but may be revisited in another video. So the 3 that we want you to focus on today are the 3 that we'll discuss at the beginning. So your task is to choose from one of those 3 modes, expository, observation, and participatory. Then in your groups, I want you to plan, prepare, and present a scene that demonstrates an example of the mode you have chosen. So some documentaries may include examples of all 3 of these types of, so you might have a documentary that has participation from the filmmaker. Then there are also elements where it's just purely observational. And then there's times where there might be narration and voiceover. So a lot of documentaries will include components from all three of these modes. So just because you may have planned a documentary so far that may not necessarily conform to one of those modes doesn't mean that it cannot include elements of those modes. So that being said, in your groups, I want you to plan, produce, and present a scene that demonstrates an example of the mode that you have chosen. So if you decide to do expository mode, then your task today is to go and film something that is the evidence. So here it says the claims are made as voiceover and the evidence is the images. So you'll film something that serves as evidence to an argument, and then you will include voiceover that makes that argument. So you'll have voiceover that makes a claim, presents an argument, and then you'll have evidence that's demonstrated through the footage if you were to choose expository mode. So ideally, you would choose something that might relate to your documentary so that it can be used for that project, so this isn't a waste. But otherwise, if you want to be creative and do something else, that's fine. All you need to do is choose one of those modes and then plan, prepare, produce and present one of a scene that uses one of those modes. Okay, thank you for watching.